Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson from the State Water Survey. Our webinar today on funding financing options for private well owners. Couple things I want to mention right up front. I'm getting over COVID, and so I'm still got a really bad cough, and that's going to be evident to everyone who's on the webinar today. I'll just let you know now. And we're having a little technical difficulty with one of our USDA folks, and so we'll see what happens when we get to that point in the presentation. So this is hosted by the State Water Survey at the University of Illinois. We're part of the Prairie Research Institute here. We house all the scientific surveys in Illinois. Our efforts on the water surveys, well, I'll get to that in a second, but yeah, the private well class is a program here that's sponsored, funded, and supported by the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, RCAP, and the funding comes from US EPA through their Technical Assistance and Training Grant Program. Okay, this is part of a national program implemented through RCAP. So it's our job with the private well class is to do kind of the online national program for education and outreach. RCAP has staff in every state. With boots on the ground. They do assessments of wells as well as workshops and work with stakeholders locally. Some of you probably know some of the RCAP folks if you have been involved in private well issues for very long. And these materials follow the private well class, but it's not the actual 10-lesson class. And I'll point that out at some point later here today. We do record every webinar. And so and we have a YouTube channel. So this will be available later, as the last time we did this webinar was in 2020. And so that one is still on there as well. And some of the same information is there. But two things about questions. You were all given an opportunity at when you registered to submit questions. We went through those. Honestly, most this time will be answered during the slide presentation, especially the USDA portion. A lot of the same type of questions related to funding, and we realize that's a huge issue around the country. But you can also ask follow-up questions. And so Katie Buckley, who's on our staff, is monitoring the question box or the chat box. You can, whatever you have on your GoToWebinar window, whether it's chat or question, you can put questions in there and we'll keep track of those. And at the end, once we get to the question slide with the glass of water that's blue and white, we'll pull that document up, a Google Doc that we share, and go through all those. And so if something comes up today that you're not clear on, or you have other questions, or you want to expand on, that's your chance. And at least from my point of view, we'll be here to answer your questions as long as you're willing to listen. So if you're a NEHA CE recipient, meaning you're an environmental health professional, the National Environmental Health Association offers continuing education credit, and we're a provider through that program. Typically, this slide talks about every 2 years I have a credentialing cycle and all that stuff, but we haven't done this since 2020. So anyone who's here today that wants CEs through NEHA is eligible to do so. We're also an Illinois LEHP provider. And so here's our email address, info@privatewellclass.org, and we can provide a certificate of attendance, a copy of the slide deck, which is a big file this time, and we can work with you to complete your NEHA forms. And so be patient with us. Some people are impatient whenever they send us information. They expect to get a response right away. Sometimes there's maybe 100 people who want certificates, and that takes us a little time. We're a small staff. All right, RCAP. If you haven't heard of RCAP, it's made up of 6 regional nonprofits. These are the 6 regions they cover in different colors and their names. I'm in Illinois, so we're part of the Great Lakes Community Action Partnership. As far as who serves us, I'm not a member of GLCAP, but this is the folks you want to know. So like if you're in Texas, you would work with Communities Unlimited and their private well folks. If you're in Montana, you'd work with Midwest Assistance Program, and that is going to come up today. So the point here is, they're a technical assistance organization. They're a nonprofit. They use funding from HUD, USDA, and US EPA to provide services for rural areas and small communities and private well owners, and as well as septic owners. And so, you know, they're boots on the ground. They're in every, like I said, they do assessments of wells, which is a really nice service. It's like a vulnerability assessment to determine if there are any issues with your well, those sorts of things. And they've done well over 3,000 of those in the last few years around the country. As I said, I'm at the State Water Survey. I always want to toot our horn a little bit. We were formed by the state legislature in 1895 because of all the new things we were learning about water quality and diseases, specifically cholera and typhoid. And so the Water Survey was formed to investigate those issues initially in Illinois. So we have a long history. We house the state's well logs. We have records going back into the 1800s. 4 wells in Illinois, just a lot of neat stuff. This is a typhoid outbreak in Pana, Illinois in 1916. There were 32 cases. I've shown this slide a lot if you're on our webinars regularly, but it's really interesting because we investigated why there were 32 cases of typhoid, and it ended up being that the Pana Ice Cream Company, which is in the middle there, actually had sold milk, and they had one large tank that everyone used the same bucket to scoop their milk out of, and it got infected. It had typhoid in it, and so it caused all these cases. But we figured that out for them way back when. We do well tests, we drill wells, we help communities find well water, groundwater, and those sorts of issues, and do a lot of water quality work. This is one of my favorite slides. Today, this probably wouldn't be allowed, but this young man's helping a water survey chemist sample the water well in New Athens, Illinois in 1914, I believe. So a lot of cool history, as I said, and it's a great place to work as far as, you know, we help a lot of people and communities, not only in Illinois, but around the country. So I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the State Water Survey, and today we have 2 guests. Actually 3 guests. So Lola Maritita is a decentralized water systems grant manager at Rural Development USDA. Her slide presentation is about the decentralized program, and I believe Lori Davis, who's also with us today, and I apologize for not getting this on here, is actually going to present. And then Andrea Hively is here. She's a branch chief for the direct loan program and at Rural Development, and we'll be discussing their decentralized program. I did not change that. She's going to talk about the 504 program and 502 and 533 programs, which may not mean anything to you, but you'll know what they are at the end of today. So Katie Buckley works with me at the Water Survey. She's our outreach specialist. She's the one who's going to take your questions today, and she's the glue that keeps everything rolling, is the best way to put it. So, so with that, the first thing we need to do, and this is, yeah, we have a poll question, and Katie's going to manage that, I think.
Yep, so I'll launch the poll question right now. Give me one moment. All right, so there should be a poll on your screen for all our participants on today. We just want to know what role best describes you as a participant on our webinar. And there's 5 options there, so feel free to select one, and we'll give it a few seconds for you to complete your answer. All right, we have 85% of the votes in, so we'll give it just a few more seconds, and then we'll close the poll and share the responses.
Yeah, I will mention that, you know, we look at these things, if you're attentive and how long you're on and all that stuff, it all rolls into getting your CEUs. So please participate if you, especially if you're looking for those things. You need to be responsive.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I will share the results. Looks like about half of you all on here today are from some sort of regulatory agency. Got about 15% of you are well owners, and the rest of you fit into one of the other categories somewhere.
All right.
All right.
Thanks. Yeah.
I'll hide the poll, and you can continue onward, Steve.
Right, and you know, yeah. All right. Thank you, Katie. Okay, so as a well owner, which we, you know, it's interesting, only 15%. That's kind of low for most of our webinars, but and that's all good. the things to remember are that they're not regulated. As far as once they're installed and in place, unless you're going to sell a property or some of those things, you're on your own. You need to be the steward of your water supply, and it's important for you to keep it maintained. The other thing to remember is that, some people show water that has a color or maybe smells bad. That does not mean it's not healthy, honestly, necessarily. It could be the best tasting and safest looking in the world, but things like arsenic are colorless, odorless, and have no taste. So the only way you know that your water is safe to drink is by testing. And everyone should test their well regularly. And that's an important point if you're a well owner, to make sure that you're following a standard sort of approach to protecting you and your family. So I grew up on an old dug well. It was only 14 feet deep. When it rained, it was cloudy. It was completely not safe. My dad swore by it, and that's what I grew up drinking until I was 18. But today I live in town, and so I pay $40, $50 a month, which I know I need to change that because I have an 11-year-old daughter, and so now it's more like $60 or $70 a month. That's a cost spread out over all the residents in Champaign-Urbana for sampling the water to make sure that it's safe, for maintaining all the lines, the pumps, all those things, and the infrastructure, and to ensure that it's safe, including licensed operators and all the staff it takes to maintain a water system for 150,000 residents. And for you, you're the owner as a well owner of a very small water system, and all of those things are your responsibility. And so it's not something to take lightly or just to assume is going to always be okay. They're mechanical systems, they have a shelf life, and things can change in the ground. So it's important to know how to take care of your well. And for us, the message I try to give every month is you need to understand where your water is coming from. So that means you need to know how deep your well is. If you have a pump that's in the ground, or if it's in the well, or if it's a superficial pump, then what's the pump setting at? And does it have a screen or not? So it means, is it a dug well, or is it a sand and gravel well or a bedrock well? All those things are important for understanding when you have a problem. If someone's going to help you, that's information that's critical to understand. So also that there are natural occurring contaminants. I mentioned arsenic. There's a lot of others. Radium, uranium, beryllium, believe it or not, which I won't go into today, but if you've been on any of our webinars, there's an area in the country where there's high beryllium, and it's a regulated contaminant. Again, you need to understand if those are there. There are probably folks in your state, your state geological survey, or your water quality agency, or your primacy agency for the Safe Drinking Water Act, who can tell you if there's areas where there's a natural occurring contaminant in your state. And by going through not only these webinars, but taking the 10-lesson class, it helps you learn to ask better questions. And that's the point I try to make to people. A lot of folks email us and say, oh, I learned a lot. Well, the important thing is taking that information, and then whenever you do have a problem, you can talk intelligently with a driller or extension person or a lab, and understand what's going on. And then lastly, again, sample your well. That's kind of a message that always will be there. So today we're going to talk about funding and financing for private wells. Costs for being a private well owner there's a lot, really. Some people want to have a well just to be independent. They think, well, I don't have a water bill. Well, you're selling yourself short if you consider that it's going to eventually fail, and you need to be prepared for that. You have, not only drilling or replacing a well and the water system components, but sampling regularly if you're doing the right things, and then managing your system, your septic system, if you have any older unused wells on your property, and then if you need treatment, maintaining that and making sure it's working properly. So many well owners really don't understand these responsibilities or the costs associated with it. And if you don't go into it knowing all of these things, it can be a real shock. There's some people I'm sure are on here because they need a new well and they're not sure how they're going to pay for it. And that's a very common thing. So this is from 2018, so you can add about 50% to these numbers today. But Katie called a number of drillers around the country. We actually went on the contractor list for the National Groundwater Association, and She randomly picked a driller in 6 states, or actually it was 8 states, I only included 6 here. And this is what it costs to drill a 300-foot well in each of these states. You know, California, that 40,000 won't even get you started. Matter of fact, the loan program out there now for wells that have gone dry gives you $45,000 because it costs that much more to go deeper. But it's just an idea of the range of what costs are. It depends on where you're at. You know, and it may be the driller we called is in a rural area, like in South Carolina. It may be, you know, he only drills in the closest 3 counties to where he lives, and he makes a good living that way, and so that's why his is much cheaper than everybody else's. But it could be, regardless, it's a pretty big investment. And when you consider today, most of these are going to be over 20,000. It's something not to take for granted. As far as well issues, funding issues, you're individually responsible for your water supply, and that's just the way it is. Having a private well means you're independent. It also means that there's not support for you like there are for a public water supply. You know, the USDA was going to talk today, has, I'd say, a quasi-national program, and that's probably not fair today because I know one of their partners actually can provide a loan anywhere in the country now for repair replacement, but it's income-based. And there's also a local and state programs for assistance, but they're really sporadic. It depends on someone championing that cause in their state. And in some states, they won't even consider providing resources because they consider it a private property issue. It's, for instance, there was talk years ago of trying to require testing of all private wells. In some states like Illinois, which is mostly agricultural based, where land rights are a huge issue, the idea of being forced to test your water would never get through our legislature. It just would not, and that's the fact. And I know in some states, they have passed rules. Like in New Jersey, it's the first state to pass a rule that when a property transfer happens, you have to take a water quality sample through the state lab. I think that's a great rule, but that won't happen. And I think 4 states now have that rule, and there probably won't be very many others that actually do that. Everything, again, we already showed you how expensive these are, and the resources available really vary, as I mentioned, loans, cost share, or grants. And so we'll get into some of that. But first of all, and Lori Davis is going to speak for Lola today. Lola's having the same issues I am with her voice. And so with that, I'm going to go to the first slide, and Lori, if you'll just say next slide, I will keep it moving as you wish.
Great. Thank you, Steve. So as Steve said, my name is Lori Davis, and I am the Technical Assistance and Training Grant Manager here at USDA. I'm stepping in for Lola today due to her illness. However, Lola is, along with Katie, monitoring the chat for any questions you may have. We'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present at the Private Well webinar this afternoon. We're delighted to be here to talk for talk about a couple of USDA rural development programs. Next slide. So today I'll provide a program overview on the rural decentralized water systems, which is also referred to as DWS. Next slide. Previously known as Household Water Well Grant Program, the DWS program is one of many grant programs administered through the Water and Environmental Programs. The program should really be titled Rural Decentralized Water and Wastewater Systems. When changes were made in the 2018 Farm Bill, Congress added the wastewater component but did not add wastewater to the title. So the DWS grant program is governed by 7 CFR 1776. The DWS program allows us to issue grant funds to qualified nonprofits. These nonprofits then create a revolving loan fund or make sub-grants to increase access to safe and reliable drinking water. It also helps improve sanitary conditions caused by inadequate septic systems for eligible individuals who own and occupy a home in rural areas. Funds may be used to construct, refurbish, and service decentralized water and wastewater systems. They must already have a well on their property. For instance, if someone is building a new home and wants to use funds to install a new decentralized water or wastewater system, it's not eligible under this program. Next slide. DWS is one of the most searched programs for RD, and it gets a lot of interest. 30% of the US population lives on decentralized systems. The DWS application period is announced using an annual notice of solicitation of applications, or what we call NOSA. We're currently working through agency clearance for the FY fiscal year 23 NOSA. We anticipate the NOSA to be released in late spring or early summer. Interested parties are encouraged to sign up for email updates at sign-up for email updates, rural development, USDA.gov. Or you can periodically check grants.gov. If selected, obligations will occur prior to September 30th, and the project period will begin on October 1st and end on September 30th. Since nonprofits are awarded DWS grant funds, homeowners are encouraged to contact the DWS grant recipients for eligibility requirements. A list of current grantees can be found on our website, which is on the slide. Next slide. Here are some of the 2018 Farm Bill changes that were implemented in fiscal year 21. Most notable is the name change from Household Water Well to Rural Decentralized Water System Grant Program, or again, DWS, which should really be Decentralized Water and Wastewater Systems. In addition to loans, the grantees can now make sub-grants to eligible applicants. The program was expanded to include decentralized wastewater systems, increased loan amounts from $11,000 to $15,000. There were no changes to the rates or terms. It still remains at 1% fixed interest with up to a 20-year term. Changes to the income eligibility language in the definition of eligible individual from 100% of the state non-metropolitan median household income to 60% of the state non-metropolitan median household income. Next slide. So who can apply? As mentioned earlier, nonprofits are eligible to apply, and there's a 10% match that's required. Nonprofits must meet criteria such as having sufficient expertise and experience in lending activities, promote the safe, productive use of individual-owned water wells and decentralized systems, have the legal authority to act as a lender, and comply with federal and state laws and regulations. Most of all, no delinquent debt or outstanding judgments to the federal government. Next slide. The maximum loan is $15,000. The maximum term is up to 20 years and is 1% fixed interest rate. Remember, this is a grant to the nonprofit organizations who is required to create a revolving loan fund. Funds to individual homeowners will be in the form of a loan. Subgrants are allowed only if approved by our agency and can be used to address reasonable costs. In fiscal year 2022, we allowed subgrants of up to 25% of awarded funds. Subgrant levels are determined on an annual basis and is reflected in the NOSA. Some examples for loans include installing a new water well because the original well has run dry or is no longer operational. Other examples include the installation of new pumps, water softener, water testing, repairs, or inadequate decentralized septic systems. DWS loans may not be used to substitute may not be used to substitute for water service available from collective water and wastewater systems. For example, if a recipient wishes to restore an old well, which had been abandoned when the dwelling was connected to a water line belonging to a water district, this is ineligible for a DWS loan. Next slide. Since 2018, funding for the DWS program continues to increase. Annual funding is at $5 million. Historically, this program has been underutilized, but in recent years, new nonprofits have been awarded, which increased the number of rural communities assisted to increase potable water availability and provide safe and sanitary wastewater system needs. In 2022, 5 applications were funded, totaling approximately $3.9 million. Grants awarded range from $222,000 to $1.5 million. Over the past 3 years, we've assisted an average of 6 applicants, totaling $3.3 million. Next slide. So here we're going to give some spotlight to some of our fiscal year 2021 grant recipients. Currently, we have 9 grant recipients across the country who administer DWS revolving loan funds. As you can see, some organizations provide services in specific states, multi-states, and one provides nationwide services, including Puerto Rico. So in the next slide. As previously mentioned, Bolinas is one of our newest grant recipients who received $643,750 in fiscal year 2021. This project is currently focusing on assisting 25 homeowners to address failing septic systems to meet state requirements in California. Communities Unlimited was awarded $50,000. In Texas, a mother of 2 children, a son with medical issues, and her disabled daughter had no source of water. The mother started working with Communities Unlimited, who assisted with the application process and worked with her to ensure that she met all of the eligibility criteria. Once eligibility was determined, a new septic system and well were installed, ending many decades of struggle that the family had been faced with, and she no longer has to face the daily challenge of hauling water to provide for her family needs. Then we have Great Lakes Community Action Partnership. They received $200,000, and so far they've approved 6 water well loans in Michigan and Illinois. Next slide. Then we have Seven Rivers Research, Conservation, and Development, who also received $200,000 and have approved 13 water wells and 7 decentralized wastewater system loans in 5 Georgia counties. Seven Rivers had an applicant who was in need of a new well because his shallow well had caved in due to drought conditions. The home was occupied with 2 adults and 4 children living in the house with no access to water. After going through the application process, the family had a brand new deep well installed with an 82-gallon tank and a 1-horse pump, motor, and control box. Then we have SERCAP, who was awarded $1 million, and they've approved 1 wastewater and 5 water well loans in 4 states, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. Over 60 applications have been sent to individual households. SERCAP assisted a low-income couple in Virginia with the installation of a new septic system at their home. The couple has owned their home for 50 years, but just recently began experiencing problems with their septic system. As it turned out, a drain filter was blocking the flow of the wastewater, causing damage to the couple's finished basement. The contractor installed a new drain field, inspected the old system, and replaced it with a new system. The couple once again have an environmentally sound and reliable wastewater solution at their home. Lastly, we have Water Well Trust, who provides nationwide assistance. They have received $1.4 million, and so far they've produced 52 loans, and 47 are in progress and still funding additional projects. Waterwell Trust assisted a South Carolina homeowner with a new well after it went dry. The well company was able to get the new well installed in November, just in time for Thanksgiving. It was a very successful well drill. And finally, a New York family of 5 needed help with their septic tank that was unfortunately not being properly maintained. In addition, the tank lid was made of roofing shingles, plywood, and a metal bed frame. The tank itself was decomposed and had also caved in. It literally caved in and had a large hole exposed to raw sewage in their backyard where the young children played. After some obstacles with the application, the new septic system was able to be installed in September 2022. How awesome are those stories? Next slide. So here you have Lola's contact information. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact her directly. And hopefully Andrea was able to connect.
I do see it. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you, CF, for getting housing involved with this. Those were some really awesome stories, and I wish I had those kinds of millions to help out too. But we do have some really great programs that can be involved in some of these projects. They have a little bit lower loan and grant limit, but for individual well owners, these could be really the saving grace for you. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So before I talk about the programs, which are the Housing Preservation Grant Program, the 504 Repair Loan and Grant Program, and the 502 Direct Home Loan Program, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how the housing staff is situated as far as the local level, which is our area offices or field offices, and then the state office, which those area offices report to and sometimes are actually managed by, and then the national office, which is where I reside. And my main function is to allocate the funds, write the policies, and try to keep the workflow moving for the state and field offices on the ground. So when you're applying for something through rural development for housing, you're going to want to go to this website, find your state, and then drill down to the local office that services the county you live in. And that's how you're going to be able to get an application to apply for the program. Or you can contact the state office directly. Sometimes they're a little easier to find when you're on that website. But emailing me for an application, I will definitely get it to you, but I will want to connect you with your state staff that does all the really great work on the ground. Next slide, please. The other important thing to all of our programs is the rural eligibility and the income eligibility. And so we have another site for that. It's actually called the eligibility website, and the link to that is there on the slide, or you can type it into your web browser and bring it up. But first and foremost, you have to be in a rural eligible area. And that can get a little bit tricky because we do, like CF, have definitions that are in our Housing Act or in our policy, but there's grandfathered areas, and the eligibility review gets redone, with new census data. And so we're just about to launch into that new eligibility review, but we actually are lucky to have this handy-dandy map. So if you go onto the website, you go to property eligibility and you accept our terms, then you will be brought to a map, and you can either put in your own address or someone else's, or you can zoom into a certain area of the state and see clearly where the lines are of what properties are eligible for these housing programs I'm about to discuss with you, and those that are not. And then also our income limits are another key piece. Individual owners have to be below certain income limits to qualify for the program. So you can come here and pull up a PDF with a map and go to your state and your county and see what those limits are. Now we do have banded income limits, so hopefully you're finding that you're in those income limits, but if not, then our programs just aren't a great fit for you. So let's go to the next slide, please. So first, our Housing Preservation Grant Program. Now, the Housing Preservation Grant is actually made to an organization. So all of our folks on here that are nonprofits or local governments or tribal entities, you're eligible to apply for the Housing Preservation Grant Program. And this program is a smaller program. We only get about $16 million annually, but we were able to spend all of that last year, our first year, actually managing this program, because it used to be in the multifamily housing portfolio, but we just got it in single family housing last year, and we were super happy to be able to spend that money But some other grants, range from, let's say, 50,000 to maybe even one in Texas got to 500,000. And you can charge up to 20% admin costs to the grant. And the rest of the funds go to make repairs to homeowners that are in the low income category. So up to low income, and it's basically like a pass-through. An organization gets the grant, and then they can help you get a new well or repair your existing well, those kinds of things. And this is a NOFA program, similar to what CF described earlier in their presentation. So it's usually announced sometime in spring, with applications due beginning to midsummer, and then we award before the end of our federal fiscal year, which is September 30th. So that's the Housing Preservation Grant. Let's go on and talk now on the next slide about the 504 Rehabilitation Loan and Grant Program. So this program is made directly to the homeowner. We have a loan product that's a max loan of $40,000 at 1% interest for 20 years. And upon waiver, we can go over $40,000. I know that well installation can be super expensive, and so there is some flexibility there to go a bit over that $40,000. But typically, $40,000 maximum at 1% for 20 years is about $200 a month payment, so really affordable. Now, if the loan goes over $7,500, we do have to secure it by a lien against the property, so a mortgage or a deed of trust. And I know some homeowners that have their land and home free and clear aren't fond of that rule, but it's not something we can waive. We do have to put that on there. Now, if you don't have a mortgage and we go over, I think the limit is $15,000, then we are going to probably have to have you hold escrow through us. It may have changed to $25,000. Those two numbers get confused in my mind as far as when we need the appraisal and when we need the escrow. But if you start getting into that $15,000, $25,000 range, there may be some extra costs involved with that loan. Now, both the 504 programs, again, you have to be in a rural community, but these serve very low. So when we're talking about the Housing Preservation Grant through through a pastoral organization, that's the low income. Here, this has to be very low only. And then our grant program, it's only for those that are 62 and older. Disability status does not matter. It is age only. And this can only be to remove safety and health hazards. But of course, if you don't have safe drinking water, that is a safety or health hazard. Here again, we have a maximum grant of $10,000. However, I will say that we do have some waiver ability to that to go a little bit higher. So if you're working with your local office, we can discuss some of those potential waiver possibilities for you if you need a bit more. Now, I will mention, it's not quite released yet, but some of you are very savvy. I saw that there was some regulatory folks on the line, and so you may have seen in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023, which funded the government, thank you very much, Congress, for the rest of this fiscal year, we received some disaster funds. So if you happen to be in a presidentially declared disaster area and has had some well damage, because of that, or other damage because of that, there's going to be a grant program rolling out in about a month. It's going to offer probably about $40,000 to low income folks, 18 or older, homeowners 18 and older in those rural communities. And so I will be happy to forward that information out through this organization and far and wide, because we definitely want to spend that extra money that Congress gave us. So that's one thing not just on my slide that's up and coming. So you're one of the first to know. Congratulations. And let's talk about the next program, which is our Direct Home Loan Program on the next slide. Now, the Direct Home Loan Program is typically used to purchase a home, but it absolutely can be used to make repairs to an existing home. This program is a subsidized home loan program that serves up to that low income. The subsidy means that while your going interest rate here in the month of February was a 4.25, your income may justify a subsidized rate as low as 1%. So if, let's say, your payment on this well repair was going to be $200 a month at the 4.25%, but because of your income, we're able to subsidize it to 1% and lower the payment to, say, $350. I don't know if those are real numbers or not. I'm just throwing out something to give you an idea of what that subsidy does to your payment. Now, the difference between the full note rate payment and the subsidy goes into what we call this recapture account. And when the home is sold or transferred out to a new owner, we look to recapture a portion of that subsidy. And that can sound very scary, but really we're equity sharing. And so the average person, no matter the size of their account, are paying it back less than $10,000 in their subsidy recapture. But if you don't have any equity when the property sells or transfers, like say it transfers to an heir and there's no equity transpired, then we may not collect any of that subsidy. So the real benefit is having that 1% interest. Don't let a subsidy recapture scare you, because there's lots of calculations that go into that, and most people don't end up paying back even half of what goes into that account. We have extended payback terms on the direct home loan program, so 33 to 38 years. No down payment requirement if you are using this to purchase a home, but of course, no down payment requirement if you're using it to do home repairs. And we can loan up to 100% of the value of the home. And what we mean by must meet certain property requirements is just that we would want to be able to bring the home up to a decent, safe, and sanitary standards. There's the word I'm looking for. I always get distracted by this little girl on the slide. I don't know if you all are distracted by how adorable she is. Her name is Isabel, and one of the very first self-help builds I ever went out to, a home opening, a ribbon cutting, and key ceremony where these homeowners put all this labor into their homes, get their keys. This little gal came out. I was talking to some people on the front, and she pulled me by my hand and said, "You want to see my room?" And of course I wanted to see the room that her family had just built her. And I could barely keep up with her. She's running up the stairs, and by the time I get to her room, she's spinning around with her arms wide open saying, "This is all mine." And so anytime I see her, it reminds me of why we do what we do, in providing affordable home ownership and decent, safe, and sanitary housing in rural communities. So, all right, enough of my sidebar story. Let's move on to the next slide. I only have a few more for you, and I thank you for your attention. One of the partnerships we're continuously trying to develop is those that want to package for these programs. We are frequently dealing with staffing shortages and hiring freezes, trying to spread our administrative funds out as best we can to all the wonderful programs that we do. And so one thing that can help our staff and help us become more efficient is if there's packagers out there in the communities that can start getting the loan or grant packages together and submitting them to the local office already ready to go. When we at RD have to, send a letter to the owner and say, send us all this stuff, it can be overwhelming, finding your old taxes. And with packagers, you all may already be in the communities, meeting in their homes that can help them find these things, not only save them time, but get their loan and grant applications processed faster. And for that, you can earn a fee. So let's go to the next slide and see what that fee looks like. Our certified packagers, there's a couple different levels. So for the 502 Direct program, if you work with an intermediary, and so we have these larger organizations that work with multiple packagers across the nation in different regions. And so if you work with them, there's some benefit to that because the larger fee can be charged. They're quality control for the packaging body, and so they can help you with any errors you might have before it's submitted to rural development. And I believe all of them are taking the extra step to be the one to submit it through the electronic eForms portal, if not being done by you yourself. And so there's a split, and usually the split is that the intermediary takes $250, and so you can still earn up to that $1,750 that the certified packaging body earns without an intermediary. And so there's kind of two levels there. And we can talk more about that on a case-by-case basis. If you want to reach out to me directly, I'll connect you with our packaging folks and they can talk to you more about that. But it really is a huge benefit to not only the communities we serve, but to the owners themselves. Now let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about how you become quote unquote certified. Well, first you need to have at least 1 year of affordable housing loan origination or affordable housing counseling experience. And you must be employed by a qualified employer. And so what is that qualified employer? That's pretty much anybody who's not a for-profit entity. Can't be working for Wells Fargo and be doing packaging too. But if you're packaging for Habitat for Humanity or you're packaging for Neighborhoods America or any of those other great packaging partners out there, then you will be within a qualified employer. You need to take the training course and pass the test. Now, our intermediaries put on a training course in conjunction with us several times throughout the year. There's been online courses, over the pandemic, and so I encourage you to visit our packaging website, which will be on the next slide and also on one of my last slides, and see who the intermediary is in your area and when the packaging classes are that are coming up. And then you have 1 year after the date of the test to pass the exam. Okay, so my very last slide for y'all here is next, which is who are the intermediaries. And really that's just a lovely map that you will get used to seeing if you go to look up our income limits or our intermediaries or just about every everything that we have statewide. Our state offices are looking like this, and you just click on the link. So very consistent for you there. Those are the 3 programs I wanted to talk to you about. You know, we have a site loan program as long as the site's being developed for housing, affordable housing products. We can do some work there with these types of wells, but I didn't want to go too far off the main programs that would be directed towards well repair. And so the next slide is for any questions. I'm happy to answer some now. And the next few slides I think you'll have access to, which are some resources. And then myself and my counterpart, the other branch is Shannon Chase, that does all things 502 Direct, in case you want to reach out to us about any of our programs. And I will stop there.
So there are 3 questions, and I think they're kind of geared towards both of you. Do you want me to pull those up now?
Sure, that would be great.
Okay, so tell me if this works. Okay, can you see those or not?
There's just a slight delay for me. So, oh, there they come.
Okay.
What funding is available for condos? Yeah, so I don't, for single family housing, we had been relying on condo approvals by HUD, and that would allow us to help them. And I know HUD has kind of discontinued that process, so I think we're just kind of approving condos on an individual basis. So you would work through your field or state office to get the condo as approved. And really, there's just a few sticking points you can see in our regulations that we look for as far as occupancy, you need delinquency, and we can get the condo approved, and then some of that funding could be used potentially for the condos. It is a tougher one for us though, so you'd have to go through a few steps before we were there. But I'll stop there and let our CF partner talk.
This is Lola. As far as the DWS, that's a very good question. That's never been that has never come up as far as any of like the nonprofit organizations, as far as you know, for specific condos, as far as individual systems. And I would have to do a little bit further research. However, I think with that, with like those, with the condos, I don't believe they would be individually owned septic systems or water wells. So I think as long as it's an individually owned system, we would definitely be able to provide funding under the DWS. But if it is something where it is like a cluster system or a shared system, that would be ineligible under the DWS.
Yeah, I think the second question is for you too, Lola.
Yes, so on that one there, can a private owner get a DWS loan through a nonprofit organization? When they're saying a private owner, as far as a home, yes. You know, as long as they own the home, you know, they would work through through one of the grantees to receive a loan.
Yeah, I think that's the thing to make clear to everyone is the DWS program. RD gives money to a nonprofit like CERCAP you mentioned, and then they give out loans to individual well owners, where the program that Andrea talked about, the direct home loan programs, you're applying, at least in some of those cases, right, straight to RD.
Yes, exactly. Only the housing preservation grant would be through a nonprofit.
Right. And then the third question here, and is what are the definitions of low and very low income? Is there is that the 60% or I guess?
Yeah. So I do the income limits for housing, and it can get a little bit tricky. We used to say that low was 80% and very low was 60%. But when you really look at HUD's median income limits, you can't always work backwards into that. And here's why. Because in about 2001 maybe-ish, there was an opportunity for federal agencies to enact what we call our hold harmless clause. And what that clause does is it makes it so the single family housing income limits that are issued from HUD annually never go down. So even if a HUD has lowered their income limits over the years, ours never went down. So it's really best, at least for the housing programs, to go to that PDF and look, because it's not a calculation you want to just, oh, there's HUD's median, let me just do 60% or 80%, because ours they're going to be higher than that.
All right, that's something I didn't know.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to move on, and this is still Andrea's slides. It's a single family housing direct program update. Sign up for Gov Delivery is the next slide.
Okay, great. Yeah, so these last few slides, we're just offering the opportunity to sign up for our Gov Delivery. This is an automatic email that we don't use over frequently, but it lets you know when our interest rates change, we've had any policy changes, and that is, I don't know if CF uses that same Gov Delivery, or if you can, I think if you go to that, you can choose which ones you want to sign up for, so you can pick housing, pick CF, pick business, and pick and choose. And then the very next slide is resources. So again, that income and rural eligibility website, our handbooks and regulations, and then the state office contact. And then the very next slide after that is just my contact information. And then, as I said earlier, the counterpart to me, Shannon Chase, who does all things 502 direct home loan purchase. And I really thank you guys for continuing to talk about the programs today. I'll hang on the phone if more comes up.
Yeah, and again, this is all recorded, so all this will be available. And you can also email us for any of these URLs if it went by too fast today. Well, thank you both, or all three of you today for participating. And I know Lola plans to stay on in case we have more questions at the end. Yeah, I'm going to move on unless there's anything else. Okay, I'm looking to see if there are any more questions added. Nope, okay, we're good. Okay, so all I'm gonna do is talk about a bunch of examples now. And so again, I wanna mention, so this is the current website for RCAC, which is one of the 6 RCAPs, regional offices. This is the Western one that's based in Sacramento, but covers 17 states. I wanted to highlight that. So they're listed on that list that Lola and Lori provided as one of the grantees for the DWS program. There are 4 of the 6 RCAP regions that are direct grantees, but 2 of those also cover one of the other regions that's not a grantee. So for instance, Communities Unlimited is based in Arkansas and covers the Southeast. But they also are working with MAP, which covers the upper Midwest and the Plains, and providing funding all the way to Montana. And the same for CERCAP, they cover the Eastern Seaboard up to about Maryland, I think. But RCAP Solutions is the Northeast RCAP that covers the New England states, Pennsylvania, some of those areas, New York. And CERCAP is working with them in partnership to provide loans in those areas. So there's, through the 6 RCAP regions, they basically also form a national network. You can reach out to any of the 6. And I think somewhere in the questions, I might provide a link to get to their website as well. But you can also get to those from USDA's website where they list, as was shown earlier. So some other programs that are out there, and the reason I want to go through some of these things is it's pretty clear that unless you're very low income or low income, there aren't a lot of opportunities, and at least through the USDA program. But there are other opportunities. They're just not national in scope. So for instance, because of the drought in California, they've created a program through the state legislature in California where they offer up to $45,000 for an individual well or $100,000 for a small water system where their well has gone dry. Excuse me. And so it also is income-based, but it's a real opportunity in California that you can't get anywhere else for that kind of funding. And so it's worth mentioning. I also showed the Water Well Trust here. I just took a screenshot of their page from yesterday, and the $1.5 million they're getting from USDA. They also work with a bunch of partners. So they've worked this H2 Alabama, Jetstream, different corporations. The Water Well Trust is affiliated with the Water Systems Council, which represents a lot of the industry companies that make treatment equipment or equipment for wells or treatment systems. And so they're leveraging that to get additional funds volunteered to increase the amount of work they can do. I guess that's what I wanted to say there. So in emergency situations, I know, excuse me, Andrea just mentioned it. So, Texas, Florida, obviously hurricanes and all those things. There are resources through FEMA if you're in one of those areas as well. And it depends, even in some states, they have programs in place in response to a natural disaster. And we've, I'll show a few, but I wanted to point out that we created a web page and it needs to be updated. Katie and I haven't had a chance to discuss this today, but it's just privatewellclass.org/funding. And it has links to some of these other programs as well as the USDA program and some other things. Yeah, and it's just, the message I want to leave for everyone is you need to be inquisitive. You need to look online. There's a lot of even local groups that may have funding for not particularly for installing a new well, but for testing or for septic or for abandoning a well and all those sorts of things. And so that's what we're going to cover the rest of the time here. So here's the FEMA page, Individual Disaster Assistance. If your well has been affected, you can contact them. Minnesota has a program through Minnesota Housing. And again, I'm going to go through these kind of fast. We don't need to dwell on it. You need to, if you're in one of those states though, there's opportunities. Tennessee Housing Authority has an emergency repair program. And again, it didn't take us long to find all this information just by using a few keywords and searching. And it's worth your time to find out if there's a program that might be beneficial to you. Especially, we get calls from well owners when they've had an emergency situation. My pump failed. I live in I'm a low income person. I need to do something right away. I've got, either kids or my mother's living with me. I mean, we hear those stories quite a bit, and we try to reach out to both RCAP and the Water Well Trust, as well as other folks who might, in Tennessee, we work with the state agency there, and so if they know of any other opportunities, we certainly reach out and try to find those for them. I point this out because, and this is an older slide, or an older, it's a newsletter, but these two counties are, because of the drought, and I believe this is in Wyoming, they had cost share for getting water for farmers and producers. And so I know someone asked a question in the comments, I skipped that, I didn't mean to, about wells for livestock and things like that. I would say in general, no, none of these programs really are intended for those things, but locally, you need to ask. And I'd say your local USDA office is a good place to start, county office there. I mentioned additional programs, for special interests or well abandonment, water testing. One thing I would ask, we do have a lot of folks on here who aren't necessarily looking to be recipients of these loans, or maybe they're looking to become a grantee. But if you know of any programs, we'll add them to our funding page if you'll just email us and let us know. And again, as a well owner, you should research this online and find out what might be available. Somehow I got this in here twice. I apologize. I meant to take that out. But there's certain states have wherewithal and certain states don't. That's the bottom line. Minnesota, their residents passed a law 15, 20 years ago that adds money for anything related to their public health department for research and providing services. And because of that, they're able to do a lot of these type of programs for repairs and loans and help their residents. Texas Veterans Home Improvement Program. If you look through this list of things that if you're a veteran in Texas, water conditioners, water coolers, water heaters, water towers, water wells. There's a long list here, including, I believe, septic, sewage systems. And so, if you're a veteran and you're in Texas, there may be other programs like this. I haven't looked, but it's just an example. One thing I want to mention is abandoned wells. If you live in a rural area and it's a newer home and a newer well, and maybe on an old farmstead that had an old dug well, we find those all over. Matter of fact, there's probably as many unused, unsealed, abandoned wells in the country as there are actual wells in use. And we find them all the time. Sometimes people find them the hard way, but because logs weren't required in most states until at least the 60s, some as late as 2000, there's a lot of undocumented wells on file that aren't on file. And so these wells a lot of times are in pits or they're an old dug well, so they're also a safety hazard. And what I want to mention here is if you have an abandoned well, you need to seal it. And there are some programs like through some of the soil water conservation districts, or it depends on where you live, where they might cost share that. But if someone falls in a well and gets hurt or killed, you may be likely liable for that. So, or it can contaminate an aquifer. I need 1 second. Okay, we'll see how many times that happens today. Here's some examples. The newspaper clippings are all from the 90s. The third one down from Midland, Texas. If you remember when Jessica McClure was a little girl, she fell in a well. They covered it live on CNN. It took, I can't remember, 20 some hours to get her out. She was only 3 years old. Now she's a grown mother of 3. In Washington State, it's the Department of Ecology that regulates wells and well construction and drillers. And they have a blog, which where these 2 pictures came from. One, they're trying to pull a horse out of a well, an old abandoned well. And the other one, the Sheldon man falls 45 feet. This was in his backyard and he didn't even know it was there. And he fell down into this well. They brought him out. He walked away from it. Very lucky. But in other cases, like some of these newspaper clippings, they're not so lucky. Okay. Again, on a local scale, you might find that there's cost share available for different things. Here in Nebraska, they offer for decommissioning wells. Again, this is just a form that you can, if you want to apply for having the well abandoned, you have to do the legwork, talk to a well driller or contractor about what it's going to cost, and then what the cost share rate is 90%, and as it mentions here, and so then they can either decide to do that or not do that. I know in Illinois, some of our soil and water conservation districts offer this kind of a program, and they have a set amount of money, and if it gets used, it's gone. But in that particular county, it may mean that 8 or 10 old abandoned wells have been sealed properly now, and they're not a risk to anyone anymore. Same for septic systems. There's a much more emphasis at the state scale or local scale because of the water quality impacts that septic systems and decentralized systems have on water quality. And so, this is the Catskill Watershed Corporation has a program because they're trying to protect the New York City watershed. You see a lot, Chesapeake Bay programs. That's why some of the more strict state rules, like in Massachusetts, their Title V program, is because they're trying to protect water quality for a lot of us out there. And so this is a mass.gov to the Community Septic Management Program. The 4th little bullet down there is betterment loans to homeowners. So if I go down to that part of the page, they've got a whole system. And I kid you not, they have, if you talk to the RCAP Solutions folks, they have a lot of rules for septic systems. And, there's no, in Illinois, I know we have septic systems with straight lines to a small stream. that have been there for 80 years, and there's just not the manpower to go find all those and fix them and put them up to code, and they're breaking the law. But we're much more serious about it in some other states, from what I've seen. And so there's a lot of opportunity here. They're trying to also then provide funding so that homeowners can actually do the right thing and bring their systems up to where they need to be. West Virginia Housing Development Fund. And just more examples. Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. And so all these have different terms. It's based on what they've developed. And then going back to, this is an ag program in Minnesota, but it's for septic systems. But it's to prevent and reduce runoff from feedlots, farm fields, and other pollution problems. So it's meant to, again, it's trying to protect our health by protecting how water quality is affected by runoff and other things. As far as water sampling, there's a lot of groups. This is in Appalachia. There's a group that's providing water sampling, especially in areas where there's been a lot of mining. This program no longer, I think it's ended, but Florida DEP has a private well sampling program. I know if they find an issue in Florida with private well being contaminated, then the state gets involved and investigates, because a lot of times it's a contamination issue from an industrial contamination. And so they're pretty serious about getting people off of those water supplies, bringing in centralized water if it's necessary, and all that sort of stuff. But it's, again, you need to just be inquisitive and find out what's there. Here's a cost share for testing. This is just a conservation district. And then, Iowa has one of the coolest state programs. Their legislature has funded their counties for years. It's called the Grants to Counties program. And this is the testing part, but the Grants to Counties program is either for testing or for cost sharing abandoning wells. And so by this program alone, hundreds of samples are done every year that probably would not be done. And so one, the state learns a little more about the water quality and where there's issues, and two, a lot of folks understand their water well quality much better than they would otherwise. Just another program where they've reduced the cost to, you can test for coliform bacteria, E. coli, and nitrates for $35. And then the last thing I want to mention, I think we're getting near the end anyway, is there are a number of extension programs, like in Texas. The Texas Extension Program has developed this Texas Well Owner Network. There's Pennsylvania has one, Virginia has one, and they do workshops. So they find funding, or it's funded through the state, and not only are they going around the state of Texas doing these workshops to help people understand their wells, but they bring portable lab equipment with them. They do testing. And some of these are full days and some are an hour in this case. But it's really a worthwhile way to see your results at the same time, where you can then ask questions and find out what you might need to do. And this is from Montana. So they have a program there too called the Well Educated Program, similar. It's part of it's through extension. And yeah, it's really valuable in that as a well owner, not only are you learning more about your well by going to this workshop, but you're also getting a free sample. And this is Hamilton County, Indiana. They work with Great Lakes RCAP, and which, I mentioned this well assessment, or maybe I have it, I will in a second, or I will in the questions. So, well, I'll just mention it now. So I mentioned at the beginning, through the EPA funding to RCAP, there was an assessment tool developed, which we helped build, that's like a sanitary survey for a private well. If you know what that is, it's what a community water supply has to do every 3 years. They have to look at their system and determine if there's any vulnerabilities and try to correct those things. This is voluntary. No one's going to tell a well owner that they have to do anything, but by having somebody come to your home, spend a few hours with you going through, the type of pipes you have, if you've ever tested, what do your water quality analysis look like? Do you have a well log? All those sorts of things you learn a lot about your well and things you might be able to do. I just was on a call with a driller yesterday, and in his opinion, and he's in Minnesota, but he said probably over half of the wells that end up having coliform bacteria problems have a poor well cap. It's either not on properly, or it's broken, or the lid's off of it. And we could fix so many problems if people just took care of their wellhead. And he sees that day to day, and it's really true. And so there's simple things that doing a well assessment will identify and help you understand the things that just aren't a good practice if you're going to protect your well from any kind of contamination or any surface influence or any risk of breaking part of the cap, or if it's a PVC pipe especially, it's susceptible to cracking and those sorts of things. So I want to mention that because RCAP does those for free. They have a limited number they do every year, but I think in the last since the program started, they've done over 3,000 around the country. We haven't done this webinar since 2020. So yesterday, or a couple days ago, I asked Katie to spend a little time on the web to see if there are any new programs or any other things for funding or support for private wells or septic. And what we learned is there's more states that are providing resources today for private well owners than there were even just 3 years ago. And what I've seen, I've been working with private well owners for 30 years to date myself, but certainly in the last 6 to 10 years, there's been a huge increase in the number of mainstream media articles, research publications in the last 6 to 10 years. There's a lot more people focused on private well issues than there were 10 years ago. We did a project for CDC in 2013 trying to identify why well owners don't test. And when we searched the literature, we could find very few articles related to private wells specifically. So we took an approach where we looked at any kind of intervention, whether that was for anything for a public health issue in a rural area, teen pregnancy, heart issues, you name it, smoking. And we looked at what interventions those health professionals employed to try to get people aware and to make changes to their behavior. And we ended up writing a really nice paper out of that. But most of the research that we used to write that on why people don't test their wells was not based on other research that had looked specifically at private wells. Today, there's plenty of research out there in the literature, if you're into that, on private well related work, and that wasn't there before. So it's starting to make its way into policy and programs, and I think that's why we're seeing some of these, a lot more things happening. And it's also a lot more vocal. So for instance, Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, they use some of their ARPA money to create a well compensation grant program. Now, if you're familiar with some of the issues in Wisconsin, they've had a huge issue with some of their farms and contaminating some of the shallow aquifers there. It's been in the national news, or it was a year or two ago. And so they've developed a program now to deal with that and to help people figure out how to get safe water. Penn State, I mentioned Penn State earlier, their extension, they have one of the best education programs for private well owners in the country. It's interesting because Pennsylvania is one of 2 states that still don't license drillers through a program that requires them to pass an exam and maintain a license. And they also don't have a well construction code. And so I think because of that, Extension and a lot of other organizations have jumped on the bandwagon to try to protect their water resources and educate people about wells. And Penn State's got a really great program, but they started doing more sampling in the last couple of years because they've got funding from other groups like CDC, their Department of Environmental Protection, and their Groundwater Association all contributed to allow them, because they do these educational programs anyway, to go out and test. And so, again, I think we're seeing a lot of newer things happening because of that. This is a document from Oregon, and this is the second page, but it lists, they have an Oregon program, they list the USDA's program, and then they list RCAC, which covers Oregon for the loans they give through the USDA DWS program. And a group called Craft 3. This was new, financing for homeowners facing septic system repair, and this is in Washington State. And so we're seeing, and locally, now Wake County is the Raleigh area. They're a wealthy county. They have a great groundwater program of their own. In fact, yeah, we've worked with Wake County on a number of issues. They operate almost like a state health department, which is really amazing. But they have their own program for funding some of that work. This is a soil and water conservation or a natural resources district. I think this is in, I believe this is in Nebraska, but they've made state funds available for private well owners to install treatment. And RO systems are used in this case. You know, there's so much irrigation and agricultural chemical use in Nebraska that they've contributed a lot to the contamination of the shallow aquifers there, which a lot of communities and private wells use for water supply. And so there's nitrate problems in major areas of the state because of that. And now the state is coming up with a program to allow the installation of reverse osmosis systems for those that need it based on testing. So that's what I have. I'm going to talk about the private well class a little bit, and then we'll get to you all's questions. And so I want to talk about the private well class and make sure everyone understands. Again, this webinar is part of our program, but it's not the class that we've developed for well owners to take, right? There's a 10-lesson class. Our program works with a number of partners. I should mention that first. You know, we're funded by RCAP, and we also work with all the regions. NEHA, the National Environmental Health Association, NGWA is the National Groundwater Association, and the Water Systems Council is WSC. We also work with the Texas Well Owner Network, and we've worked in the past with Penn State, Virginia, and a few other of the state programs as well. You know, the many hands make light work, and especially in a state like Pennsylvania where they've already got an established program, it's better for us to work through them than to try to work separate from them. And so that's the approach we've taken. This is the front page. Register for the class, just click on the green button. And there's an entire version of our class in Spanish. So if you're in an area that has a lot of native Spanish speakers who are on private wells, you know, this is available as well. Our webinars page, this is a few months old, this slide, but if you go to webinars and events, you can see the webinars that are going to happen, the one listed today, for instance, and then everyone's recorded, as I mentioned. So a few, like what well owners need to know about lead, we haven't done since 2018. We've done it twice, in 2016 and 2018, but we brought in an expert from Virginia Tech who basically led the webinar and talked about a lot of the issues she uncovered in doing research related to lead in private wells and you know, best practices and all that stuff. And so we really have, you know, a really, this is a really great webinar if you're interested in lead issues. You know, lead is really a home issue. Very rarely is it a groundwater issue. And so it matters how old your home is and all those sorts of things. And we also have a lead page on our website. I don't know if I listed that here. It's just privatewell.org/lead. We have a number of videos on, call them training videos, but on a specific topic. What to do after a flood. What should I know about a shared well? You know, we see so many shared wells around the country where there's no agreement, there's no contract, and you know, the person that owns the well, because it's on their property, is the person who has all the say in the end. And so it's really a risky situation to be in if you're on somebody else's well. We started a podcast a couple years ago. We've had 2 seasons. We're just about to release the 3rd one. It's kind of at the intersection of public health and drinking water. And so we've had both private well folks and community water supply type folks on. These 2, Judy Manners is with Tennessee Department of Health. she deals a lot with springs, and the fact that people swear by their spring water, even if when you sample it, it pegs the bacteria count off the chart, so to speak. And then I mentioned Penn State has a great education program. Brian Swistock, who's now retired, talked to us before he left about some of the things that they've done and tried. And that's drinkingwaterpodcast.org. I encourage you to take a listen. We have a newsletter that goes out once a month, and these are just two examples. We did a well sealing demonstration with a bunch of other groups. We were fortunate enough to be asked to help, and it was an old well that was in the middle of a town. And people bought this property and wondered what that concrete pad was. It turned out they had a well. Excuse me 1 second. So the goal of our program is really simple. It's to help well owners understand why their well is important, why they really need to understand how it works. And again, that means well depth, where their pump's set, what kind of geology they're in, all those things, and then what they can do to protect themselves from risk. So we're going to get to the submitted questions, and this is just on time because Lola's going to speak for a few minutes and give me a chance to recover here. So we'll answer some of the questions you've had. Wait, I apologize. Obviously, we can't get to all of them. I think there were 60 or so. But if you have questions from anything we've said today, put them in the chat box. Katie's keeping track. Looks like we do have a couple more. And so Lola, these are the questions that you had. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So some of the questions that had come in was, is there an income threshold to qualify for USDA funding for a new well? With this question, the eligible individuals must have a combined income that does not exceed the 60% of the state median non-metropolitan household income. And so with this here, what we recommend is to contact the grantee, the nonprofit grantee at the state that you're located in, because they would have, each state, of course, has different income guidelines. And so they would be able to provide you with the exact amount of combined income that would make you eligible for the DWS program. Another question was, what resources are out there for homeowners in need to replace the wells? So with the DWS, as it was mentioned in the slides, DWS grant funds are provided to the nonprofit organizations, and the nonprofit organization in turn creates a revolving loan fund and then is able to assist the individual homeowners in the form of a loan. And so just to kind of go through and reiterate, the maximum loan amount is $15,000 for up to a 20-year term with a fixed interest rate of 1%. And then the next two questions were just asking as far as if there were any assistance in Maryland and also in the state of Michigan. So for the state of Maryland, we do have the South Rural Community Assistance Project, SRCAP, and they do provide services to help Maryland residents. Their contact information, as well as this, with this final question here for Michigan residents, we do have Living Better Tomorrow, Inc. and the Great Lake Community Action Partnership. Their information can be found on the USDA website. And if anyone's having a problem accessing the website that's on the slide, please feel free to contact me directly, and I can definitely put you in touch with the contact folks for the two organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Lola. Okay, so the rest of these questions I provided answers for, but if, if Lola or Andrea, either one of you want to jump in anytime, please just do. This is, meant to be a conversation. Did I just mute myself? Okay. So yeah, please feel free to just jump in if need be. So one thing I want to say, and then this is the kind of the downer part of all this, but what if I can't afford to replace or repair my well? As we've mentioned a lot today, there is a lot of need out there, but as a well owner, you're the owner of your water supply. And it's just like a small community where everyone pays a water bill every month. I encourage people to put money aside. And I know that's not easy necessarily, but it doesn't take a lot over time. Once a well's installed, it could last. We see wells that last, and there's wells over 100 years old. I mean, that's not normal, but it certainly can happen. But if you put a little bit away, then if a pump fails, or if you need to replace a line, or all of a sudden you're having some kind of water quality issue that you need to treat for, you'll have money available for that. And I know that's easy to say and a lot harder to do. But it's, the water itself is free in general, but it takes money to pump it, to have all the pipes in place, to sample it, to make sure it's okay to drink and all those sorts of things. And because this is mechanical equipment, it is eventually going to fail somewhere, whether that's the pump or if it starts pumping sand. There's a lot of things that can happen to a well that shorten the life of it. And so you need to treat it that way. And you hear all the time from people, well, I don't have a water bill. Well, you should give yourself a water bill, because otherwise maybe you have the wherewithal to get a loan for $10,000 or $20,000, but a lot of us don't. And so it goes back to the whole thing of most people, just especially that live in communities, just expect to turn on their tap and it's going to work, and they have safe water pressure, a whole 9 yards. Well, if you don't understand where all that comes from and why, you're not valuing water as much as it needs to be. I used to joke with a colleague, we work a lot with small communities as well. We should have a national turn off the pump day. Just have every water system, except where it'd be a health risk, just turn off their pumps for a day and see how people fare without having water available to them. And they'll understand a lot more how much water matters. And you just have to make it a priority and understand what its real value is. And that's my soapbox question, I guess, and I apologize, but I think it's necessary. There's a lot of questions asking about testing and treatment funding for a specific locality, and I guess we certainly can't go through all those, but hopefully we provided a good overview of what kind of possible options there might be, and given you at least some tools and ideas to go out and search to see what might be available. And honestly, there may be nothing, but you may be in an area where there's a number of different sources of information. USDA is obviously the big player for financing private wells, and their program, as they talked about today, has really grown through the last Farm Bill, and it'd be great to see it expand further. But it's still income-based, and it's still, there still needs to be a way to reach. I mean, we have a lot, there's 22 million private wells out there, and that's over 55 million people. So there's a lot of people in our country that use private wells, and that's growing. I think Maine is the first state to, now they have more of their citizens are on private wells than are on public water. And I think that's the only state in the country that way. It's really interesting that it's happening that way. How do other programs across the country either find funding for these residents, or where can we search for grants that would provide funds to supplement costs? And I didn't want to put it all on here, but this came as an email before it was also put in the questions from someone who's a graduate student working in Connecticut at an extension office, so cooperative extension. And so, they have a grant from CDC, but what happens whenever that grant runs out in 2 years? Because there are no other programs. And so it's, my point is my answer here is it's really up to the state or some local entity to make this a priority and provide funding, or there needs to be something to identify why it's necessary. And so there are a number of examples today in our webinar. I'm going to give one other one. In Connecticut, RCAP Solutions is in that area. They can do these assessments I mentioned. I also want to mention RCAP Solutions is working with the Public Health Association of Central Massachusetts and have sampled, I think, 240 private wells in, I think, 12 health districts in the state of Massachusetts. And they're using that information to show how contaminated groundwater is with natural occurring contaminants in some cases, but also other things. And there's also a supplemental PFAS program in Massachusetts that the state's funding. And through that, now they're working to try to change legislation in the state to make this more a priority and, the right to safe water more of a, they're trying to get the well program more on par with their septic program where there's funding available for well owners. And that's what it takes. People have to make it a priority. They need to talk to their legislators. They need to, or their organizations that may be able to provide those funds that have discretionary funds and help them understand, having safe water should be a right for everyone. And it's also a necessity, for those things. What can I do for water treatment when the area is unregulated? And I took this to mean that the whole realm of water treatment is basically unregulated, and I would agree in a lot of ways. There's a lot of bad equipment out there or fake things out there, like, what's the term? Something that makes your water more alkaline. That all depends on where you live. In Virginia, the groundwater is at 5.5 pH. In Illinois, it's 7.5 to 8. So it's already much more alkaline. And so to buy a piece of equipment, you need to understand your water quality for those things. But the point here is you have to be cautious when you're working with an entity that's selling you something, whether that's water treatment or a car or anything else, right? So you need to do your legwork and homework to be sure you're getting what you need, that it works properly, that it's at the right price. It's up to you to do your homework. So there's really three things here I want to mention, and this has got a number of slides that go with it. One, test your water at a certified lab first. Understand what issues you actually have. I've run into cases where someone basically found out their pH was a certain value. Someone came to their house. They said, well, here's all the things this can mean. And I go to their house and they had $4,000 or $5,000 worth of treatment equipment. I'm like, well, what did your water sample say? Well, we never took a water sample. So they spent all that money not knowing what their real water quality is. That's on them. You have to be a knowledgeable consumer. And so the thing we recommend in our program is you use a certified lab, test it for inorganics and metals, as well as bacteria, and understand what your general water quality is first. And you can take that to a qualified person, your local health district or county health department or your state health department. We'll look at it. I'm not a qualified health person, but I know a lot about water quality, and I can certainly get you the right people to give you that definitive number or answer. Second, then once you know your water quality, if you do need treatment, research what types of treatment might be needed. If someone's trying to sell you an RO unit, well, RO is great at removing many things, but it doesn't remove everything. Or, a filter is only good for certain things, or granular activated carbon is good for certain things, but you need to know what it's meant to treat for and make sure that it does. And once you know those things, and I'm going to show you some tools that'll help this to make it a little easier, then contact a treatment vendor to work with. And if they try to sell you something you don't think you need, point it out to them. Get a second opinion. It is buyer beware. And so it's not a decision to go into lightly, mainly because a lot of treatment equipment may cost close to between $500 and $1,000, but it also has maintenance costs. If it's a filter, if it's an RO unit, if it's a UV unit, whatever it might be, they all have maintenance. And I had a guy who's a groundwater professional with the state of Minnesota Health Department. When we started our private well class, he suggested that we don't talk about treatment at all. He said, I see more treatment equipment that's not being maintained properly, that's become the source of contamination. A filter that's left unchanged can eventually start harboring bacteria and all those sorts of things. And he said, I wouldn't even talk about treatment, and I couldn't do that. We're trying to work with people who want to learn and want to be better at maintaining their wells. So that said, it's on you as a well owner. So for test your water at a certified lab, every state accredits labs. They have to for the Safe Drinking Water Act, because every community water supply has to have certified samples that show their water is in compliance with the law. Try to use one that's on their list. There's states that have programs. Iowa's Grants to Counties program. There's others that we mentioned for sampling. And then when you work with a lab, make sure they give you good instructions, tell you how to preserve your sample if you need to, whatever you might need to do, how quickly it needs to be back to the lab, all those things. Ask questions until you're satisfied. And if they can't provide all the answers you need, find a different lab. And I work with the Association of Public Health Labs, and I tell them that. I tell well owners, if you can't give them, you don't have a groundwater person or a well person who can give them good answers, they should find a lab that can, because really, it's a, you shouldn't be expected to be the expert. So for instance, the US EPA has a webpage for certification of labs for drinking water. And as you go down this page, there's a map where you can use the drop down. You click on it, it takes you to the state primacy agency's website. So in Illinois, that's the Illinois EPA. In Wisconsin, that's Wisconsin DNR. In Minnesota, it's Minnesota Department of Health. In New York, it's Department of Health. So it just depends on what agency is a primacy agency for their drinking water program. They'll have a list of certified labs. So 2, what types of treatment might be needed to deal with anything found? Research that. So a couple of years ago, Minnesota Department of Health came out with this document that to me, it's one of the most valuable documents that we have to use as private well professionals. It's called Home Water Treatment. So it tells you how to go about this, how to select an option. It's freely available. If you Google MN for Minnesota, home water treatment, it's like the second or third choice. And there's the link, but again, that's kind of a lot to remember before I change this page. So as you go through this, it lists every constituent going down the left side here, and then which types of treatment will work on it or will partially remove it. So you already know if I have, it doesn't happen a lot, but there are places where there's natural occurring fluoride. There's a lot of ways to remove fluoride, where there's only a couple ways if you have high chlorine. So if it's salt water or if it's seawater that's upwelling into better groundwater. So or magnesium, there's 3 listed versus manganese that has 7. But you have all these options then, and then it describes every one of these treatment systems. Absorptive media filtration, I just use this as an example. What it is, its pros and cons, what it costs, based on there for point of use versus point of entry. And that's the other issue you should know. In most cases, there's no reason to have a point of entry treatment device. Point of entry means where it enters your house, which means every drop of water going in your home has to be treated. That's the toilet, that's the shower, that's the dishwasher. And in most cases, like for arsenic's not a dermal threat in levels found in groundwater. You don't need a point of entry arsenic unit. You need a point of use one on your kitchen sink. And look at the difference in cost. $300 to $700 versus $2,400 to $4,500. And these numbers are probably low today. So it's a really useful tool, and everyone should, it gives you some knowledge. So when someone starts saying, well, yeah, I think you need aeration and filtration, well, and you need a point of entry unit, you can say, well, why point of entry? And again, if someone's going to ask you to spend $5,000, get a second opinion. Find out for sure, and a neutral opinion, not someone who's trying to sell you something. Third, contact a treatment vendor. So, like any other salesman, there's good and bad, but the Water Quality Association has a program for voluntary certification for treatment specialists. I would use someone who's been through their program. One of the big pieces in it is they sign a thing on a code of ethics that they agree to work with. The WQA in the last 8 or 10 years has done a lot to become an impartial champion for the water industry. There's no other way to say it. And so on their website, you can find a list of, you can search by zip code and find vendors. If they've got any of those certifications, and again, like what I tell folks in Pennsylvania, if well drillers have a license, I can buy a license to be a well driller in Pennsylvania with no training, no anything. I would use someone who's been through National Groundwater Association's Master Driller Program, so that I know that they've passed this exam through NGWA as a voluntary program that shows that they know what they're doing. And the same way with this for treatment. You have at least a better place to start from, if nothing else. And so, and the last thing is, any treatment equipment you buy should have one of these symbols. So these stand for third-party certifiers. NSF is a National Sanitation Foundation, Underwriters Lab, and the Water Quality Association has a gold seal program, which means it's been tested, and it actually, that seal means it actually removes what it says it's going to remove. If you look for arsenic treatment equipment, you can find that it might range from $50 to $1,000. Somewhere in the middle, you're going to find a line where most of the things above that line have one of those 3 seals, and everything below it doesn't. So you might buy this treatment device that's only $50, and you've just wasted $50 because it doesn't remove what it says. And it gives you an assurance, again, and it's worth doing things the right way so you're protecting yourself and your family. We had a question from Crow Nation about, they have this WASH task force, which WASH stands for water and sanitation and water, sanitation, and hygiene. It's a big term in public health, and they're having issues. One, it's difficult to apply for RD loans, and they also have housing shortages there, where they have homes that have multi-generational families living in them, which in some cases is overloading septic systems. So it was a much longer thing that they gave us in their question, but I just wanted to mention that if they're applying directly to RD, that's probably through the home loan program that Andrea talked about. And there's these other programs that USDA has, a LOLAS program for the DWS, where you need to apply to a nonprofit like the Water Well Trust, or I mentioned reach out to MAP and CU, which is Communities Unlimited. They're working together. I'm assuming this is in Montana, and yeah. And so I called Jesse Campbell this morning and found out that some of the folks in the WASH task force are working with Jesse. He's with MAP, the Midwest Assistance Partnership. He's a private well lead that covers all of that region. And he agreed to send some more information your way about that program. And I understand it may be an issue of not meeting the low income requirement. And in that case, the USDA program probably isn't a fit. So I also reached out to the Indian Health Service. And we had another question that was just what options are available for tribal private well owners. And so I reached out to, I've worked with them a number of times where I've visited wells on tribal lands. And so this is the message I got back from them, and I'm just going to read it. The Indian Health Service Division of Sanitation Facility Construction, which also puts water and wastewater systems on tribal lands for community supplies, may be able to support, following eligibility determination, tribal members through both technical assistance and construction resources to address the need for a new replacement of failing private well. And he didn't say it here, but it's also septic. So it includes water analysis to determine what the water quality problems might be, that to be sure they meet the Safe Drinking Water Act requirements, and then how to address those challenges. And what the point he wanted to make was, if you're a tribal member that wants that kind of support for your individual home, you need to reach out to your tribal administration and find out who is working with IHS through their sanitation facilities construction group, and then they can reach out. And if you're not sure who that is, or if they're not sure who that person is, and I can forward this link to anyone, just send me an email, but it lists the directors, the contacts for each of the regions that IHS has facilities. It has an office in around the country. And so what I take from this, and then not to be too general, is that it's likely, unless you've already used this service in the past, that if you have a well problem, IHS may be able to help you fix it, and which is a great service for anyone that's on tribal lands for sure. Community water systems. Is there any federal grant money to assist in drilling a well for a community system if they're a nonprofit, city, county, or public system? The Hutterite colonies here fall into this category. So, you know, our program for the private well class, because we have a sister program called wateroperator.org that works with community water and wastewater systems, is our program here is for private water supplies. In fact, the RFA for the EPA grant that funds us specifically mentions it's not for non-community systems, it's not for community systems, it's for individual homes or a group of homes that are as their primary residence that are not considered a public water supply. Because I know there's another question about a non-community system. So as far as this question, I'm assuming since you mentioned the Hutterite colonies, if you're in Montana or South Dakota, again, that'd be MAP, the Midwest Assistance Partnership. They work directly with small communities on water issues, help them write grants for funding, help them get through the system. You know, the USDA has a loan program for community water supplies, which, you know, we didn't ask anyone to speak about today because that's not what we're here for. But if you talk to MAP, they RCAP gets funding through rural development for the community water supply program, and they can certainly they'd be your first step, in my opinion. They can, you know, look at your situation and help you figure out a way to go if you need to get a new well drilled, especially with all the infrastructure money available today. I'm sure there's a program that would be beneficial for you. I mean, you can email me, that's my email address, and I'd be glad to get you in contact with the right person. And that's what I have. So I'm going to slide over our question box and get to, we finished with number 3, so I'm going to slide that up. And so the first question, and again, anyone, Andrea, Lola, feel free to jump in on any of these. I had a 180-foot rural well dug in Western Massachusetts on 2/28. Oh, no. Okay, so as of 2/28/23, excuse me, I still can't drink the water, too metallic. It has passed standard post test. What can I do? You know, without knowing your water quality and seeing your sampling results, you know, there's a lot of reasons why it could taste too metallic. It could be corrosive water and you have copper pipes, and it's copper that you're tasting, you know, that are, you know, it could be that, yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about your well and well construction. I'd be glad to take a look. There's folks that we work with, and you know, there's RCAP folks in Massachusetts that do assessments on wells, but you know, we need to see the well log. I'd need to see that in the water quality if you've done a sample of inorganics and metals to get an idea. The head of our groundwater section is a geochemist, and when we have issues like this, I work with him and sometimes the folks in at EPA's research office to try to solve, you know, unique problems if that's what this is. But you have my email address if you want to email me that stuff or contact me later. We'd be glad to look into it. So for the condo situation referenced above, is there one well, one septic for all, not a nonprofit? Oh, there is. So this is a real question for you guys. Because it's one well, one septic for the entire building, and it's not a nonprofit.
That is Andrea.
Go ahead, Andrea.
I was going to say, yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there would be a way or program that we have that would work for that specifically. Go ahead, Lola.
So,
yes, Steve, and this is Lola. I did also want to, I know that was one of the questions that had come up, and because there is only one well and one septic for all, it would not be eligible under the DWS program.
right, I figured that, yeah. All right, so probably a silly question, but how can I find information about the well I have? Because I haven't been able to find the information online. Well, unfortunately, there's many more wells than there are well logs available. It depends on the state and what records they've kept when they started requiring those things. If you can, there's a way to track this down if there is a log. We need to know how old the well is. If you said you looked online, we actually tell people, if say you're in Missouri, if you Google Missouri water well logs, you'll get Missouri DNR into their system. Or if you do that in Illinois, you'll come to us, and we can look and see if we can find a log. But if it's not available, and you've exhausted any work with the state agency that might have that information, and in some states there just isn't much available. New York didn't start requiring logs till 2000. They only have about 10% of the well logs for the wells they have in the state. The other option is to try to figure out who might have drilled your well. If it's a local company, or if it's a company that maybe was, if your well's really old, you're really going to be out of luck. But if it's even in the 70s or 80s, if you can find someone who's lived in the area for a long time, there might be, oh yeah, and this is no joke. Yeah, there used to be this well driller, but I know he's retired, or their system they went out of business. But if you ask one of the other local drillers about that driller, one of them may actually have all of his information. We've had drillers who just hand off all of their logs and notes and everything else to another driller because they're just getting out of the business. And that's basically about the only hope you have. We can try to look. If you want to send us an email with what state you're in, but some states, if it's a certain size well, they don't even require you to file a log, and then you're going back to the driller and trying to figure out, because the driller will keep a log, I guarantee it. They use that information to know that if your neighbor needs a well, they already have a good idea of what they're going to be drilling into and how deep. And so the driller's records are probably much better than what the state gets. And that's probably true in almost every state. So that's all I know to do. You find the basic information like how deep your well is or where your pump's set. You could hire a contractor to come out and pull your pump, measure the well depth. But again, you're talking $500 to $1,000 to do that, probably, depending on your situation and how deep your well is, or that sort of stuff. So it's not trivial for sure. What can be done about iron bacteria in a water well? Iron bacteria is a real problem because it exists in an aquifer as well, and likely it's going to come back. And so the problem with iron bacteria is not only all the slime and everything else it causes, but the smell. You get a rotten egg smell in some cases. You need to chlorinate, or that's what we would recommend, is continuous chlorination, like a community water supply does. And so you're treating the water as it comes in. It's not shot chlorination where you're trying to just kill the bacteria. Again, that likely won't work. It might work for a couple weeks or a month, but they'll come back. And they're really hard to get rid of. And yeah, some of our other webinars, we've talked about iron bacteria in a little more detail. And there's, I'm pretty sure that's what your options are going to be. Because it's just, there's certain bacteria that are harmful, E. coli and other things. But there's a lot of other bacteria that just exist in groundwater, sulfate reducing bacteria, iron bacteria. And if you have that, it's, groundwater is moving all the time when it comes into your well, and you're going to get it again. Yeah, so you have to treat it when it gets to the surface. I'm so sorry. So hello, I live near Topeka, Kansas in Osage County. We have a shallow well like Steve described when he grew up. Yeah, ours was 14 feet deep. I would be interested in a well assessment. I need to get our water tested. Do you have any suggestions on where to start here in Kansas? Well, as it turns out, Kansas is also part of MAP, and Jesse Campbell, who I mentioned earlier, is the lead for their well assessment program for MAP, and it's probably him that you need to talk to. So if you want to send us an email, I can forward your information to him. He may even be on this webinar, but that's not going to help you get to him unless I have an email to share with him or a phone number. And so feel free to send an email to me or to our info@privatewellclass.org, and I'll send him your information, and he can talk to you. I know he's done a number of workshops in Kansas and things like that. So yeah, and it might be a little while, but I'm sure he'd be interested. So yeah, there's a lot of these old dug wells that still exist, and they're really just not safe. It's that simple. What funding is available in northern Nevada? I've looked around on the Washoe County sites and haven't found anything except for extreme low income. What about middle income folks? You know, if you've looked, that's all we could do. And it's really, it comes back to some of the things I said earlier, which are unfortunate. But yeah, if you're middle income, unless there's some local program or there's some emergency situation, you're really yeah, you're responsible. And I don't know what else to tell you. You know, Nevada is part of the RCAC area, Rural Community Assistance Corporation, and you can look on their webpage and talk to their folks if they have any other ideas. They work more in your area and might have know something that we wouldn't. So is RCAP able to offer services outside of their service area? I know they offer services in Washington State, but it's only available to certain regions. You know, I would talk to, I mean, RCAP is the national organization that the 6 regions are made up of. So in Washington State, it's RCAC. I don't know if that's an internal decision they've made where they only offer services in certain regions that I'm not aware of, but send me an email and I can follow up and ask. Person who's in charge of that program, yeah, I can send him an email and ask. You know, RCAC covers a huge area and they only have limited resources, and so maybe that's where they're at for the current funding we have. But I don't know that. Yeah, I mean, my understanding is a service region is the entire country, depending on which region you're working with. So, all right. Thank you, and Andrea and Lola, thanks for staying on. We really appreciate your help today and your time today and explaining those programs. I know, yeah, there's a lot there, and I'm sure there's some frustrated folks, and I understand. It's just, you know, I don't know how to advocate for that other than you need to advocate for yourselves. Talk to your local folks and your legislators about the needs. Find nonprofits that are working on these issues that can use you as an example of why we need to provide more funding and there needs to be more money made available. I know even some states with their, you know, the funding they have for the SRF programs, which are meant for community water and wastewater supplies, have found ways to use a little of that funding to help with especially decentralized wastewater and maybe communities that may be all private wells. But those are really specific instances. And so, you know, just keeping people aware is the biggest issue and that there's a need. And yeah, that's all I know to say to that, is to advocate for yourselves with those that maybe control those purse strings, because there certainly is a lot more of a need than there's money available. And so, well, thank you. With that, Andrea and Lola, when I turn this off, we lose everybody. And so I'm going to lose you both. There's no way to keep you on the line separately. So again, thank you. And we'll make sure that this webinar, when it is when the recording is up and available, an email will go out to everyone who was registered for their webinar today. So everyone will get a link to that. So thanks again, and thanks for all your time today and bearing with my coughing.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.